if you're a progressive in this day and age, it's relatively easy to get discouraged when you have, one, a right-wing extremist party in control of all branches of government, and two, a so-called opposition party that's not offering a truly progressive alternative. So at a time when it's easy for progressives to feel hopeless, there was an event that took place in Chicago, Illinois. So as you all know, I'm talking about the second annual People's Summit, and it was an event that was pretty exciting for progressives. Now, unfortunately for me, I wasn't able to actually attend this event. However, there was a lot of progressive politicians and progressive independent media personalities there that I really just respect and admire. So that, in and of itself, was exciting. I mean, we're talking about Tim Black, Jordan Sheridan, Jamal Thomas, Nico House, Jimmy Dore, Bernie Sanders, Nina Turner, Tulsi Gabbard. So many people who I admire and respect were there. So this summit kind of gave progressives a reason to be excited, even if you weren't attending it. But what this summit actually accomplished was more than I ever thought was possible. And at a time when progressives are constantly under attack by the political and corporate media establishments, I feel as though this summit actually reinvigorated the movement. And again, I'm saying this as an outsider that didn't actually attend the event. I mean, as someone who's on the West Coast, and this event was halfway across the country, the energy was palpable. Like, it really felt as though progressives were coming together to talk about the future of the progressive movement. And if I were able to share every single clip that I was excited about, we'd be here all day, because Nina Turner, Jane Sanders, Bernie Sanders, they all gave phenomenal speeches. But of course, the individual who truly brought down the House was, in fact, Bernie Sanders. And I couldn't not share parts from his speech. That wasn't too long. It was just under an hour, but it was just fantastic. And he really said everything that we needed to hear. So he reminded us that even though the progressive movement is relatively new, we're winning on two really important fronts. So first, Bernie Sanders explained how we're winning on the battlefield of ideas.
There is no question that we have won the battle of ideas. And we are continuing to win that battle, and that is, brothers and sisters, no small thing. Because of the grassroots efforts of activists like you throughout this country, we have in recent years made enormous progress in advancing the progressive agenda. And I want all of you, sometimes what we all do is we look at today and we say, well, that's kind of the way it always was. That's not the case. Ideas that just a few years ago seemed radical and unattainable are now today widely supported, and in fact, some of them are being implemented as we speak.
I want to repeat what he's saying here. Ideas that just a few years ago seemed radical and unattainable are now today widely supported, and in fact, some of them are being implemented as we speak. So that's a really important point to make, because a few years ago, the thought of a single-payer healthcare system was honestly unfathomable. And when you had the former standard bearer for the Democratic Party talking about it in terms of something that it could never be accomplished, it was really discouraging. I mean, this is how Hillary Clinton talked about single payer.
Health emergencies can't wait for us to have some theoretical debate about some better idea that will never, ever come to pass.
That, to me, was one of the main reasons why I couldn't support Hillary Clinton, and I didn't want her to be the standard bearer of the Democratic Party, because that type of rhetoric, that notion that we can't get this done, so we shouldn't even try, that was unacceptable to me. However, unfortunately, there are a lot of people within the Democratic Party that, even though they supported single payer, they agreed with that sentiment. However, since Bernie Sanders joined the presidential race in 2015, Think about all that we accomplished. So just between the time period of March of 2016 and January of 2017, there's been an 8-point swing in favor of single-payer among Democrats and a 13-point swing in favor of single-payer among Republicans, according to Pew Research. That is huge. Now, additionally, an Economist and YouGov poll found that 75% of Democrats, 58% of independents, and 46% of Republicans support single-payer. You heard that correctly. More Republicans now support single-payer than oppose it. And on top of that, there's now 112 co-sponsors to H.R. 676, which, as you all know, is the House bill that would expand Medicare to everyone. And also, recently, states such as California and New York voted to advance single-payer in those states. So within just the span of 2 years, this is what we accomplished. Single payer is one issue that is no longer radical. It's no longer viewed as something that's unattainable. In fact, there are some people, even on the right, that don't just view single payer as something that is likely to happen, but they view it as something that's inevitable.
I think historically speaking, we're at the midpoint. We had 7 years of Obamacare, a change in expectations, and I would predict that in less than 7 years we'll be in a single-payer system. Look at the terms of the debate. Republicans are not arguing the free market anymore. They have sort of accepted the fact that the electorate sees health care as not just any commodity. It's not like purchasing a steak or a car. It's something that people now have a sense the government ought to guarantee.
That's a right.
Right, and because of that, even Republicans are trying to say, oh, we're not going to lose that many. Oh, yes, you'll be covered on if you have a pre-existing condition. The terms of debate are entirely on the grounds of the liberal argument that everybody ought to have.
So how do we get
Once that happens, you're going to end up with a single payer.
Well, I was going to say.
That was a Fox News host pointing out how the terms of the debate with respect to healthcare have completely shifted. We are now in control of dialogue when it comes to healthcare. Progressives did that. So we are, in fact, winning on the battlefield of ideas, and I don't need to remind you that that's just one issue. There are many issues where we're actually winning. But Bernie Sanders reminded us that it's not just the battlefield of ideas where progressives are winning, because we're actually winning seats across the country.
Not only are we winning the battle of ideas, on almost every major issue facing this country, the vast majority of the American people are on our side. But not only are we winning the battle of ideas, we are seeing more and more progressives becoming involved in the political process, running for office and winning office. Jackson, Mississippi. Let me repeat that in case you didn't get it right. Jackson, Mississippi has a new mayor, Mayor Lumumba. Philadelphia has a new district attorney, Larry Krasner. Christine Pellegrino Where is Christine? Okay, hi Christine. Christine won a landslide victory for the New York State Assembly in a district that had overwhelmingly gone for Donald Trump. Iowa has a new progressive in their House, Monica Kurth. In South Fulton, Georgia, City Council has a new member, Khalid Kamal. Andrea Jenkins, Minneapolis City Council. Julia Pacenda, Minneapolis City Council, 2 members. John Courage, San Antonio City Council. Stephanie Hansen, Delaware State Senate. Valdez Bravo, Portland, Oregon. Rita Moore, Oregon School Board. Natalie Vowell, St. Louis Board of Education. Lori Kilpatrick, Dallas School Board. And brothers and sisters, those are just a few. What we showed is that even in these very, very red states, strong progressives could do far, far better than anyone imagined, and that with proper organization and financial resources, we can win in any district in the United States of America.
So again, Bernie Sanders made a really strong point. He states how we learned that strong progressives could do far, far better than anyone had imagined. And even though people may diminish these wins because they're, in city council positions and whatnot, these are not insignificant. These are really important because Bernie-crats, progressives, are winning in very red districts that did go to Donald Trump. However, progressives never get the credit that they're owed because people argue that Rob Quist and James Thompson lost, and they're Bernie-crats, they're progressives. But what Bernie Sanders made clear is, quote, with proper organization and financial resources, we can win in any district. So if the DNC actually put as much effort into getting Rob Quist or James Thompson elected as they did into getting a centrist like John Ossoff elected, imagine how much success progressives would have across the country. The fact that progressives already had this much success with little to no support from national and state party organizations, it speaks to how powerful our movement actually is. And again, we're handicapped because we're not taking corporate money. And we're being ignored by the DNC and the DCCC. So to say that Rob Quist and James Thompson are examples of how progressives fail, you are missing the point. Progressives are having victories in areas that were unthinkable a couple of years ago, and that's something that I think is monumentally important. But what Bernie is saying here kind of speaks to the Democratic Party's betrayals and incompetence and their numerous failures, and certainly Bernie Sanders had some choice words for the Democratic Party that I think are really important.
Trump didn't win the election. The Democratic Party lost the election. The current model and the current strategy of the Democratic Party is an absolute failure. This is not my opinion. This is the facts. We focus a lot on the presidential election, but we also have to understand that Democrats have lost the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate. Republicans now control almost 2/3 of the governor's chairs throughout this country. And over the last 9 years, Democrats have lost almost 1,000 legislative seats in states all across this country. Today, in almost half of the states in America, Democratic Party has almost no political presence at all. Now, if that's not a failure, if that's not a failed model, I don't know what a failed model is. The Democratic Party needs fundamental change. Fundamental change. What it needs is to open up its doors to working people and young people and all people who are prepared to fight for social and economic justice. The Democratic Party must finally understand which side it is on. And that cannot be the side of Wall Street or the fossil fuel industry or the drug companies.
Trump didn't win the election. Democrats lost the election. This is such an important point because every single election is the Democratic Party's election to lose, because when it comes to public opinion polling, just looking at policy issues, Republicans are not popular. Their agenda is not popular. Their current healthcare proposal has a 17% approval rating. So if Democrats lose, that's because of their own incompetence. So anytime Democrats lose an election, it's because they failed to energize the base. They failed to get their message out there, and they've been failing consistently over the course of the last 8 years. So the problem, however, is that we're still having a debate about whether or not the Democratic Party should open up the primaries. Of course, the answer is yes, if you want to win. So the Democratic Party, they are a failure, but progressives aren't subscribing to Democratic Party orthodoxy any longer. And when you look at Democratic candidates like Ben Frank or Stephen Jaffe, Cori Bush, Paula Swearengin, they're not taking corporate money and they're running with truly progressive platforms. So a thing that's important for us to remember is that even though the Democratic Party is failing, progressives are infiltrating the party slowly but surely. But Bernie Sanders didn't just criticize the Democratic Party, he actually went after Trump in a way that I think is very effective. He focused exclusively on the policy betrayals and how he promised the working class one thing, but flipped immediately when he was elected.
Today in the White House, we have perhaps the worst and most dangerous president in the history of our country. And we also have, not to be forgotten, extreme right-wing leadership in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. Now, what I find particularly disgraceful about Trump is not just his reactionary economic, environmental, and social policies, or the fact that he lies all the time. What I find beyond belief is his incredible hypocrisy. This is a man who ran for president telling the people of this country that he was going to stand up for the working class, that he was going to stand up to the political and economic establishment. And then, once he got elected, and without a second's hesitation, he brings more billionaires into his administration than any president in history. And he hires the former president of Goldman Sachs to be his chief economic advisor. And then 4 months within his administration, he pushes some of the most destructive pieces of legislation in the modern history of our country, legislation that will cause intense suffering and pain for millions of working class families. Mr. Trump, do not tell us that you are a friend of the working class when you propose to throw 23 million Americans off of health care. Don't tell us that you care about working families when you want to cut Medicaid by over $800 billion, when you want to raise premiums for older workers in a very dramatic way, and when you tell, Mr. Trump, 2.5 million women in this country that they no longer have the option of getting their health care at Planned Parenthood. President Trump, spare us the lies and the hypocrisy. Don't tell us that you are a friend of working families when you propose devastating cuts to Head Start, child care, public education, when you make it harder for working class kids to get a college education because of massive cuts in the Pell Grant program. Don't tell us that you support workers when you propose massive cuts in nutrition programs, including the WIC program designed for low-income pregnant women and their newborn babies. Meanwhile, at the exact same time and within the exact same legislation, as Trump makes massive cuts to life and death programs for millions and millions of children, working people, the elderly, the sick and the poor. At the same exact time, he proposes a budget that over a 10-year period would provide $3 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%. Trump's budget is the most massive transfer of wealth from working people to the billionaire class that we have ever seen in this country. If you can believe it, he wants to repeal the estate tax, which applies only to the top 0.2%. And that means that while children will go hungry, people will die because they don't have access to health care, the Walton family, a family worth $130 billion, could get up to a $52 billion tax break. What kind of morality is that when you take from the most vulnerable people in this country to give to the very, very richest? And Mr. Trump, we say to you tonight, you are not going to get away with that absurd set of priorities.
So to me, that is the most effective way you can hold Donald Trump accountable, by focusing on the numerous areas in which he just betrays the working class. He promised us one thing, and he's now doing something entirely different. And I think that's unforgivable. So I think that if you really focus on this, you focus on the policy exclusively, you have a powerful argument against Donald Trump. So I wish Democrats would actually internalize what Bernie Sanders is saying and doing, and allow him to be the example of the party. But again, they don't want to do that. We've seen how they've ignored people like Rob Quist and James Thompson because they would rather lose than go with a true progressive. So what Bernie Sanders said here, his speech was something that progressives needed to hear. I needed to hear this. We all needed to hear this because progressives really are making progress. And even though currently we're in the trenches and we're battling for single payer and net neutrality, we're making progress. And we are winning on the battlefield of ideas. We're winning seats. And we have the winning argument. We have what it takes to actually defeat Donald Trump because we know how to criticize Donald Trump. We don't focus on the scandals. We focus on the policy betrayals. Now, that's why I say, after listening to Bernie Sanders speak, this event really reinvigorated the progressive movement. And I think that most people would agree with me. So I'm just so thankful that this event took place, and I certainly am going to make an effort to get to the 3rd annual People's Summit because, again, wow, I mean, as someone who's in Oregon, I felt the energy, watching the energy of the speakers at this event, of Nina Turner. I mean, it was phenomenal. So I'm very thankful that this event took place, and I'm really glad that Bernie Sanders made this speech because he told us everything that we needed to hear. Now, I want to leave you with one last clip from Bernie Sanders about why we shouldn't be discouraged. Because what he says here, after I've been admittedly feeling burnt out for the past couple of months, he really put things in perspective, and I think that that's really important.
Now is not the time to throw your hands up and say, I'm giving up, I'm in despair, I'm burnt out. I want you to think about the incredibly brave heroes and heroines in our history against unbelievably daunting odds who risked their lives for social justice, for economic justice, for racial justice. Now, the fight that we are engaged in now is a tough one, no question about it. We are taking on an extremely powerful billionaire class whose greed has destroyed the middle class of this country, whose greed says that it is not enough that the top 1% today owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Not enough. They want it all. And what we are saying today, we are going to stand up to that greed, to that recklessness, and tell the billionaire class that this nation belongs to all of us. This democracy belongs to all of us. And when we stand together and not allow demagogues to divide us up by the color of our skin or the country we came from, or our sexual orientation, or our gender, when we stand together, there is nothing that will stop us. Thank you all very much.
Support this podcast by joining the independent progressive media revolution today at humanistreport.com.